Уважаемые коллеги, разрешите мне объявить четвертую сессию, тематика которой развитие малых и средних предприятий, открытой. Как председатель Общего комитета по экономическим вопросам, науке, технологии и окружающей среде, я рад приветствовать всех вас на этой сессии. Но прежде чем мы приступим к работе, я, с сожалением, должен напомнить, что сегодня последний день работы экономического форума в городе Батуми. Действительно, к сожалению. Время прошло очень быстро, но уверен, что яркие впечатления останутся у нас надолго. Я хотел бы еще раз поблагодарить принимающую сторону за отменную организацию конференции, которая сочетала в себе и эффективную работу, и колорит грузинских традиций гостеприимства. Но у принимающей стороны есть свое лицо. И это лицо нам известно, и этот человек нам известен. Инициатором конференции, человеком, который максимально отдал свои силы и возможности, который больше всех переживал за успех конференции, есть наш друг, член парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ, вице-спикер парламента Грузии Георгий Церетели. Сейчас поприветствуем нашего коллегу, поблагодарим его за смелость взвалить на свои плечи эту ношу и за то, что он провел международную конференцию с таким большим успехом. Уважаемые коллеги, по заданной теме перед вами готовы выступить три докладчика. Я хотел бы назвать их. Это Вера Кабалия, министр экономики и устойчивого развития Грузии. Это Дэвид Ли, председатель Торговой палаты Соединенных Штатов Америки в Грузии, а также Стивен Хейкин, директор миссии USAID, Агентства США по международному развитию в Грузии. Докладчики готовы к выступлению. Я сейчас хочу лишь напомнить всем вам, что каждый из вас может записаться в президиуме для обсуждения или для своих вопросов, или для высказывания своего личного мнения по поводу развития малых и средних предприятий. И для этого вам надо лишь записаться. Кто же не успеет или кто захочет это сделать позже, вы можете поднять карточку с названием страны, и мы дадим вам слово. До выступления уважаемой госпожи Веры Кабали я хотел бы несколько слов сказать о сегодняшней сессии. О чем сегодня пойдет речь? Если кто-то скажет, естественно, о малом и среднем бизнесе, ответ будет правильным, но не полным. Давайте посмотрим на этот вопрос шире. Кто из нас в молодые годы не планировал стать успешным в жизни? Кто из нас в юности не делал робкие попытки самостоятельно заработать свои первые деньги? Кто, уже будучи студентом, не фантазировал, как заработать свой первый миллион? Наверное, это большинство из нас. Поэтому, обсуждая заданную тему, мы сегодня будем говорить и о нашей с вами юности. Не у всех юношеские мечты сбылись. Кто-то стал политиком, кто-то государственным служащим, а не бизнесменом. Мы стали парламентариями, непосредственно заниматься бизнесом нам не позволяют строгие законы о борьбе с коррупцией. Но все мы понимаем важность поддержки первых шагов во взрослой жизни в сфере предпринимательства. А еще, уважаемые друзья, коллеги, обсуждая тему малого и среднего бизнеса, мы будем с вами говорить о свободе. Свободе предпринимательства, как возможность самореализации, как независимость от власти, как свобода самоутверждения, что является базисом успешного существования в демократическом мире. Особенно отчетливо это понимают граждане, которые помнят бывшую советскую систему. Тогда предпринимательство, мягко говоря, не поощрялось, и даже мелкий бизнес преследовался. Все должны были работать на государственных предприятиях или же в коллективных сельскохозяйственных предприятиях. В один период даже у последних отбирали паспорта, чтобы люди не могли уезжать и жить в городе, уезжать из села и жить в городе. И даже если кто-то не хотел работать на государство, то существовал криминальный кодекс Советского Союза, где была статья за так называемое тунеядство, то есть уклонение от работы, и за это следовало от 1 до 2 лет тюрьмы. Я хотел бы здесь вспомнить случай с лауреатом Нобелевской премии в области литературы Иосифом Бродским. Его судили по этой статье за то, что он не работал. И когда на суде судья, женщина, спросила, почему вы не работаете, он ответил, я поэт. И она спросила, мы знаем, что вы поэт, но почему вы не работаете? И вы понимаете, что вот возмущение и непонимание судьи было искренним, потому что не существовало в то время свободы предпринимательства и свободы творчества. И, наверное, неудивительно, что именно такой общественный строй должен был быть разрушен. Я хочу еще раз вспомнить, с чего началась арабская весна. С индивидуального протеста мелкого торговца в Тунисе. Ему уже приоткрылись двери свободы предпринимательства. Он уже почувствовал, что такое сладкое слово «свобода». И когда его личную свободу ограничивали, он уже не мог жить иначе. И это вызвало ту бурю, которая случилась в странах Северной Африки. То есть люди, сделавшие самих себя, становятся поистине независимыми в своих поступках и в своих действиях. И в этом, уважаемые коллеги, заключается глубокий социально-политический смысл и значение малого и среднего бизнеса. Позавчера в этой зале состоялась очень интересная дискуссия на больную тему, на тему миграции. Иногда даже складывалось впечатление, что трудовых мигрантов притягивает в страны назначения хороший климат Южной Европы или Западной Европы. Их действительно притягивает климат, но не географический, а атмосфера свободного предпринимательства в демократических странах. Большинство трудовых мигрантов отправляются не за милостыню, не за социальными подачками, а за шансом самоутвердиться, сделать себя успешным, независимо, где это будет, на строительстве, в сельском хозяйстве, в сфере социальной помощи или же в торговле. Эти люди верят в себя и в свои возможности, и в свои силы. Поэтому у меня лично после нашей дискуссии сформировалось такое мнение. Для успешной борьбы с миграционными потоками, которые действительно становятся почти неуправляемыми, надо не только строить запретительные заслоны или даже реальные стены на границах, но в первую очередь сначала предлагать, поощрять, советовать, рекомендовать или даже заставлять нерадивые власти стран происхождения формировать у себя атмосферу благоприятствия малому и среднему бизнесу. И реально, а не на словах, бороться с коррупцией в своих странах. Такие меры будут и намного дешевле, и намного эффективнее. Наверное, второе измерение ОБСЕ включает в себя и такие действия. И в завершение. В 20 веке экономический рост в индустриальных обществах был связан с большими формами серийного производства. Оно было ориентировано на массовое потребление, и оно обеспечивало рост экономики. Становление же информационного общества в 21 веке вызвало новые формы ведения бизнеса. Они преимущественно предназначаются для использования высоких технологий, с учетом бережного отношения к окружающей среде. Это лучше всего могут осуществить именно предприятия малого и среднего бизнеса, как наиболее гибкие в технологическом и оперативном плане формы хозяйствования. Но об этом лучше всего, очевидно, нам расскажут наши докладчики. И я сейчас с большим удовольствием хочу пригласить к выступлению нашего первого докладчика, министра экономики и устойчивого развития Грузии, госпожу Веру Кабалию. Пожалуйста, госпожа министр. Пока госпожа министр готовится, разрешите мне очень кратко сказать о некоторых строках биографии. Вера Аталия окончила технический институт Британской Колумбии, Канада, имеет опыт работы во многих предприятиях Северной Америки. В 2010 году Вера Кабалия возвращается в Грузию в качестве главы фонда «Коалиция за справедливость». Это неправительственная организация, направленная на обеспечение целостности и демократии в Грузии. И вот уже в этом же году, в 2010 году, она была назначена министром экономики и устойчивого развития Грузии. Вот так становятся министрами в правительстве Грузии. Вам слово, Вера.
Thank you, Sergey. If you allow me, I will do my part, my presentation in English. First of all, thank you everyone for attending, for traveling to Georgia. And I do understand that this is the fourth day of your visit to Georgia. I hope it was successful last 3 days. I hope you have had interesting sessions and interesting time discovering our country as well. It is with great pleasure for me to be talking to you about the small and medium business in Georgia, the developments that we are striving to achieve, and also the economic reforms and the goals that we have had in the past years and will have are having and planning for the future years. I know you have received a lot of information over the past couple of days, a lot of statistics, information about the reforms in the country, fight with corruption. So I will try not to go in too much detail in that regard, and I thought that I will tell you two stories instead. So the first story is I was recently in India, and there I was sitting at a similar panel like this, and also business sector and government sector were present. And after the panel discussion, one of the journalists asked the business representative at the table, and he was CEO of one of the largest IT companies in India, and he asked him, what do you think is the real reason how and why IT has developed so quickly and rapidly in India? And the businessman's response was very short. He said, well, because the government had nothing to do with it. So why am I telling you this as the representative of the government? Because our government's goal in order to assist business is to be a service for the business instead of the burden. And we have tried over the past 2 years to eliminate and to minimize the number of documentation that is required for receiving, registration, and other services. We had made sure that, for example, passing through customs on the borders is as efficient as possible. So when you're working and developing your trade, it will take you no more than 20 to 30 minutes to pass through customs and with any goods. And we made sure that taxes are flat and easy to understand for everyone from small business to large business. So this is just one side, and then the other story I wanted to tell you is coming from the World Economic Forum. They had one of their regional forums in Marrakesh about a year ago, and at the opening panel there was also quite a few world top businessmen, I would say. And the question that was asked to the panel, and they were discussing for 1 hour, was how and what should developing countries do in order to sustain their economic growth. And the panel included, CEOs such as CEO of Renault Nissan, Mr. Ghosn, and many others. And at the end of this discussion, after 1 hour, absolutely every single person on the panel has agreed that two things that are absolutely necessary and key for sustainable economic growth is for governments to be investing in two things: basic infrastructure and education. So those are the two key things I believe that are important for development of any kind of business, including small and medium business as well. So what are we doing here in terms of development of infrastructure? For the last 8 years, and I'm sure that some of you have been to Georgia years before, and you can compare to how and what has developed in these years, and some of you haven't. But about 10 years ago, it would take you probably 3 times longer to travel on the roads than today. And if you're a small businessman, this is a large part of your daily business operations. And so in terms of basic infrastructure, what we did, we've upgraded all the roads and highways, and it's in the last final stages right now. We are making sure that all the necessary, for example, airports are being reconstructed and rehabilitated. We have one international airport in Tbilisi, one in Batumi, where you have arrived. We are now rehabilitating, actually reconstructing from scratch almost the second largest airport, which will be located in Kutaisi, which will serve also small and medium business opportunities, because it will be airport directed to low budget airlines and cargo. Then there is also Poti Airport, which is located next to the largest terminal in Georgia, which is a private investment. So other than that, we are also upgrading the railroad, very important link and part of our economy. Georgia is on the shortest route from Central Asia to Europe for transit of goods. And what we've done is, one, upgraded the rail links itself and the tracks, and second, we're building the second railway line between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, which will be completed next year. Also on the side of the ports, the largest port, Poti, has been privatized last year by APM Terminals, which is in the Maersk Group. And what's important is that when we're talking about small and medium business, any type of small and medium business thrives when there's large business, when there's successful, efficient large business, and small business can support with different opportunities around the large business. So when APM Terminals is investing into rehabilitation of the port, automatically there are a lot of new small businesses that are created around it. So in terms of infrastructure, of course, has been also upgrade to other utilities that are required for daily operations of business or just daily life. And what's also important is that when we're talking about business, business cannot survive or develop if there is no successful, efficient skills pool. And what's important for us is that we have future professionals, especially in the technical fields. So what we've done is a few things. One, and I know that you've received a lot of this information over the past few days, but still I think it's interesting information. So what we've done is we've provided English education to every single student in Georgia, and every single school in Georgia has native English teachers. Why would we do that? Because when you want to be a successful hub economy in the region, English is the business language of the world today, so we're giving opportunities for our future generations to be a part of the global economy. And what we've also done is we've provided laptops to every first grader, so they have access to the internet, they can receive information, they can learn new technologies at the earliest age. And oftentimes this is the first computer for many homes, and as you know, computer and access to internet provides a lot of opportunities for starting different types of small businesses. What's also important in terms of education is that these type of opportunities are not just stationed in capital or large cities, but they're available in small metropolitan areas as well. And in terms of this, we've been trying to educate our younger generation to make decisions and choose vocational schools just as often as choosing universities, and choose technical education just as often as choosing other types of education, because we've seen the trends that we've had over the past or in the 90s and the beginning of 2000s, and what we've seen is that we were lacking those professionals, especially in vocational and trade. So what we've done is over the past years we've, so to say, promoted the field of technical education, engineering, agro-industry and other. And last year was the first year where students chose as their first choice technical education over any other. Of course, eliminating or lowering number of permits and licenses that's required to do your business has increased the number of opportunities for small and medium business as well. Over the last 2 years only, we've had 200,000 new businesses registered in Georgia. Many of them, of course, are local businesses that are developing, and many of them are foreign businesses that are coming to Georgia and starting their development and opportunities here. In terms of our model of what we're doing in the upcoming years, the idea is to build a hub economy. When you're a country that doesn't have natural resources such as oil and gas, you have to be very creative about how you develop your economy. And the goal is, and it's one word, diversification. So what we're doing is we've made sure that we're not concentrating or pushing one sector specifically. We're making sure that it's as diversified as possible. So when you look at the sectors of economy that are developing or moving our country forward, it's of course transport and logistics, because this is the large part of our economy and always will be based on our geographic location. It's the energy sector, and I know you've heard about the energy sector in Georgia already in one of the panel discussions. Being independent in the energy sector and being an net exporter of hydropower is in our region, and last year we went further than in even our neighboring countries. It's the tourism sector that has grown over the last few years like not in any country in the world. Last year we had 40% growth. The year before we had 40% growth. This year in the first quarter I was anticipating 25% because we had to be more conservative, just looking at the numbers of the past few years, and we received again 40% growth. And in the months of April, when we announced visa-free from our side with Russia, the number of tourists increased 61%. So in total last year we had 3 million tourists, and this year we conservatively we're anticipating 3.5. I think we'll pass that number as well. What does tourism mean for small and medium business? Everything, because that sector is the driver for many other sectors that are connected, such as agriculture, tourism, transportation, and others. So, of course, agriculture is a large part of our economy today as well. The productivity is still low, so what we are trying to do is make sure that the quality of production in Georgia remains the way it is today, but we increase the productivity levels. And what we are doing on our part to support the development of this sector and help local producers is, one, we have free trade agreement with quite a few countries, including Turkey, but today, as you know, we've already started DCFTA negotiations with European Union, which will be a large incentive for agricultural production in Georgia. You also know that President Obama has announced his support for start of negotiations of free trade agreement with the United States as well. So diversification is key for everything in the sectors of economy, but also in the export markets as well for our production. What we've had in the past years before the embargo from Russia on Georgian products is most of the products were going to one market. And after the embargo, of course, it was a large hit on our producers, but the ones that survived became stronger. And the ones that survived and after that, new ones that were created in this field started diversifying their export markets. And what we see today is 25% of our export production goes to EU, and the rest is also diversified between Asia, Middle East, and other markets. So in terms of numbers today, our producers are exporting more in terms of dollars and cents, and in terms of numbers, more than they were during the period when they were exporting to the Russian market. So diversifying in terms of sectors and diversifying in terms of export opportunities is very important, and also in terms of investments and where investments are coming from to Georgia. If you look at the numbers, or if you ask me where or which country is investing in Georgia today, it would be really hard for me to answer, because it's 10% UAE, 10% UK, 10% US, and so forth. So again, we're not dependent on one region or one country, which is also very important for the stability of our economy. So what we received in the end is that last year we had 7% growth. The year before we had 6.5%. This year, at the beginning of the year, we announced 5.5% to 6% growth. But looking at the numbers again, I think that will be much closer to double digits than we were expecting at the beginning of the year. So this is what we're doing. Of course, there is still much more to do. There's much more to do in fighting unemployment in the country. And of course, the best way to fight unemployment today, it's 16%, 15.5%, is to help small and medium business develop. And the best way, of course, one side is to incentivize and to provide tax incentives, but I think it's not as important as providing the railroad, so to say, or the road for business to grow, which is providing basic infrastructure, providing education, and providing those essential needs that the small and medium business requires. And we couldn't do it with the support of Europe, because as I mentioned, our export 25% goes to Europe, and even our small and medium business does a lot of trade with European countries today. So this is my small presentation. I'm not sure which parts you've heard already, which you haven't, but I'm open to questions. And if any of you are interested in asking questions after the panel, I'll stick around for a few minutes afterwards as well, so I'd be happy to discuss any issues, ideas, or perspective opportunities. Thank you.
Благодарю вас, госпожа министр, за очень интересное выступление. Я должен сказать, что в Вене на зимнем заседании второго комитета прозвучало утверждение о том, что мировой финансовый кризис в Грузии имеет статус УФО, неопознанного летающего объекта. Многие о нем говорят, но никто его не видел. После вашего выступления мы можем сказать, что имеются основания для такого утверждения. Благодарю вас. А сейчас я хочу предоставить слово председателю Торговой палаты США в Грузии, господину Дэвиду Ли. Пожалуйста.
Piri Madlova. Okay, I will not be giving you any more statistics today. I was asked by the deputy. And I'll be talking about how the business associations work in Georgia, because they play an important part, and there are several of them. And I'll talk about how they actually work, because some of you may not be familiar. And I'll then talk about how some of these initiatives that the Minister has mentioned are actually affecting businesses from a businessman's point of view. I'll focus on the American Chamber of Commerce because I know more about that one, of course. Okay, the American Chamber of Commerce has over 150 members, including all the major banks, British Petroleum, Port, the main telephone companies, the main hotels, and very importantly, it has many NGOs, such as East West. The Board of Directors and the President are directly elected by the members every 2 years, and 2 board seats are actually allocated to non-American companies who can be members if they wish. The board meets monthly, and this is very important. The US Embassy also have an observer on the board, and the Chamber works closely with the US Embassy and USAID, and this relationship is extremely effective. The Embassy, the aid agency, and the Chamber. So that, I think, is key. Now, there are 2 regular monthly meetings which are attended by 80 to 100 members. These are a round table at which the US Ambassador gives an in-camera briefing on political events and then takes questions, and a lunch at which an invited speaker presents and invites questions. On a more social side, which is important to connect the businesses, we organize a 4th of July celebration for over 1,000 guests, and we have an annual ball. Our speakers have, of course, included Vera Kobalia, the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, the Minister, the World Bank, the IMF, the head of the Central Bank, and even the First Lady. Now, since the war, the AmCham has worked with the US State Department and the US Ministry of Agriculture to organize trade missions to the US for companies from Georgia who wish to export, and trade missions to Georgia from the US. Most people, when they come to Georgia, have negative feelings about this country, and therefore it's very, very important to get potential investors to actually come, go through the airport, experience customs control and passport control for themselves, drive into Tbilisi or Batumi, which are beautiful, and then hopefully when they go back, they have a completely different opinion. I hope that many of the guests here today for the first time in Georgia will go back with a much better opinion about Georgia than they came. Now, this year, the US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, hosted all the AmCham leaders in Washington to outline a strategy of economic diplomacy. And the AmCham holds regular meetings with the Georgian government and with the US Embassy to lobby on matters important to our members. AmCham is also working under a USAID grant to support the Judicial Independence and Legal Empowerment Project to ensure transparency in the legal process, with particular emphasis on cases regarding taxation. AmCham has, as many of the organizations do, a committee system which allows members to come together to focus on areas of policy important to them on a regular basis. We do agribusiness, customs, tourism, and taxation at the moment. Now, AmCham is not the only business association. There's also a Georgian Business Association, which binds together the largest Georgian companies and works in Georgian. And there is an EU-Georgia Business Council, which is based in Brussels and represents companies such as BP and Borjomi who have interests in exporting to EU. This organization will be very deeply focused on the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement that the Minister mentioned. Going smaller, we have a Small and Medium Enterprise Association, which AmCham helped to set up, and they are also working on issues concerning tax and tax disputes for smaller companies. Kaka Bandarashvili, the former finance minister and now the head of Georgian Post, also heads a Georgian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which provides consultancy services to smaller businesses. So enough about business associations. The President spoke in his speech on Friday of the many initiatives taken by this government to assist businesses, including the elimination of corruption, the simplification of the tax code, the speeding of customs, and the one-window approach to ensuring that businesses can get the necessary licenses and registrations quickly and efficiently from one place. Now, as a businessman, I can confirm that these things are working. So this is not just propaganda. If you go down and you want to start a business, you can do the whole thing within a day. But I also like to emphasize, as the Minister mentioned, the importance of the work that has already been done to the essential services in Georgia, which helps all businesses. In 2004, water and power outages were common and are now almost unheard of. The improvement in the roads, not just the main highways and the city streets, but also the secondary roads connecting the villages, increased the access of small businesses to their market considerably. As the owner of a small farm, those of you who are not involved with business will probably not realize that transport for many, many businesses is an even bigger cost than the payroll. And as part of all this secondary road development, if you get off the main highways, you will see that the gas for heating is also being extended into the villages. And this is particularly important for areas like greenhouses and for food production. So, I want to talk about my own industry. I'm the General Director of the largest phone company here. 500,000 new fixed-line phones have been installed in the regions of Georgia since the war. The cities now enjoy high-speed internet access. And of particular importance to small businesses, high-speed radio internet access is available throughout the country. If you turn on your phones in here, your smartphones, connect to the Wi-Fi, you'll get up to 10 megabit. If you go into the city centers of Tbilisi, you'll get up to 10 megabit over the new HSPA+. As an example of how our sort of infrastructure is developing, Samsung, who've just launched the new Galaxy S3 in London on the 3rd of May for the Olympics, will launch it here within weeks. So we're really in good shape when it comes to communications, roads, ports, airports, and this is important for business. Investors always ask me the same three questions. Is there a market? Is there corruption? And is the government supportive? And the answer to all three is yes. Georgia has no areas at all which are congested, i.e. there's room to make money in every single sector. The situation with corruption is genuinely fixed. You do not get asked for bribes in Georgia. And indeed, the police, for example, have an 85% approval rating, which is much higher than many of the countries that we represent, and it's certainly much higher than the UK or America. Now, the main problems remaining for smaller businesses are raising finance at a low interest rate, which of course is the same for half of Europe right now, and also systematic breaks in the value chain that has been caused by underinvestment. As an example, agriculture has been in decline in this country for 20 years. So certain parts of that value chain, if you open a business, are simply broken. So you may produce, for example, corn, but it's only recently that we've had places where you could store the corn. I'd like to make a quick point before I finish about the aid agencies. Georgia has a very, very intelligent system for applying aid. As an example, the USAID Economic Prosperity Initiative has allocated $40 million over the next 4 years, over a 4-year period, to helping small businesses, and half of this is going into agriculture. And these things really matter to small businessmen who lack the competence to build their business. Now, parliamentarians and NGOs have a big role to play, because one of the main factors holding back businesses in Georgia is a lack of confidence. Again, the President on Friday spoke about this issue, that people who were brought up under the communist system before 1990 or under a corrupt system before the 2004 Rose Revolution simply don't believe what they're being told. Some of them simply don't believe that if they open a business, that the tax situation and their legal rights will be upheld. And therefore, it's very important that parliamentarians and NGOs work with the government to try to convince the people who are actually going to invest their time and effort in businesses that it's all going to be okay. I genuinely believe, having been here for 8 years, that there has never been a better time to invest in Georgia. And I think it's very important that parliamentarians, NGOs, and the wider community do everything they can to inject that confidence. At the end of the day, business is all about confidence, the confidence to invest. And it's extremely important that we work together to make sure the initiatives that have been undertaken by the government really get down into the substructure of the business community so everyone can move forward. Thank you very much for coming. Didi Madloba, Obizanda Bistwis, Madloba.
Спасибо, господин Ли, за очень интересное выступление. А сейчас я приглашаю к слову директору миссии USAID в Грузии, господина Стивена Хейкина. Пожалуйста.
There we go. It's right there. Goes away. Okay. Thank you very much. Honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to speak about small and medium firms, or SMEs, and how their development relates to security and economic growth, drawing upon our last 2 decades of experience in transition countries of Europe and Eurasia. I will discuss some of the types of activities that have proven successful for the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and point out the implications for parliamentarians such as yourselves and other policymakers. And I'm very pleased that our experience from the last 2 decades is very consistent with many of the messages that have been shared already with you today. Should be able to go down one. As previous speakers have noted, economic growth usually promotes stability in a country, and stability, both economic and political, is necessary for economic growth. So these principles are mutually reinforcing. And I would like to add that more inclusive growth can be, the more that economic growth can be, the more it tends to promote stability. Inclusive growth is supported by buy-in from all classes and regions of a country. Inclusive growth promotes stability domestically and may help to guard against interstate conflict associated with breakaway regions, thus promoting regional and international stability as well. But if economic growth promotes stability, does any one firm size, whether it be small, medium, or large, as a category in itself promote more or less economic growth than another? More specifically, do SMEs create more growth than large firms? We've looked at this, and our answer is probably, it depends. At various times and in different places, growth may relate to the size category of firms. However, in most times and in most places, we believe it may be more useful to get firms to cooperate together to meet demands of the marketplace rather than favoring one size category over another. If we are looking at drivers of economic growth, it may be useful to look at entrepreneurial activity across the economy. Entrepreneurial activity is the ability to start and build successful enterprises. Entrepreneurial activity, creating more enterprises and expanding successful enterprises, is then a fundamental driver of economic growth. It is easier to make the case that growth is caused by entrepreneurial activity across the economy than by a particular category of firm size. We can also argue that entrepreneurial activity may at times be more prevalent in small and medium-sized firms than in large firms for a number of reasons. First, small and medium enterprises are closer to the needs and tastes of their customers. SMEs are less bureaucratic and can innovate more rapidly than larger firms. And numerically, there are simply more entrepreneurs coming from SMEs than the fewer larger firms. The next real question is how to promote entrepreneurial activity to create more successful enterprises in all size categories of firms. As policymakers, our attitude should be that we will take growth from whatever size firm we can get it from. Competition is one way to promote entrepreneurial activity and economic growth. In a market economy, enterprises compete against each other for market share. Those that are successful in this competition grow, and those that are unsuccessful stagnate or fail. Sometimes failure is actually a boon, and that we learn from our mistakes, and it helps entrepreneurs to be more successful in their next ventures. Competition should be encouraged both within domestic markets and between countries that have open international markets. Firms that successfully compete against each other for market share we call competitive firms. When countries open up their markets, as in the transitional economies, they frequently need assistance to compete in the global marketplace. USAID has invested a lot of resources to try to increase firm and country competitiveness. Being competitive in the global marketplace is rarely or easily achieved by a single firm. Meeting the demand for quantity, quality, and timeliness of the global marketplace is not easy. An important aspect of USAID assistance has been to focus on the development of value chains. Here's what we mean when we're talking about a value chain in a diagram. We see groups of firms that add value to a product, beginning with supply of raw materials to delivery of final product to the end consumer. Value chains require cooperation of both large firms and smaller firms. At the enterprise level, competitiveness is a function of two types of factors, which we call internal and external. Internal factors are those that are largely within the control of management, including production processes, quality, style, reliability, and other factors. External factors are largely outside their control, including macroeconomic stability, tax policy, custom and trade policies, if we've heard, education, infrastructure, and related factors. When we approach this challenge, we try to find out which of these factors are most relevant and most constraining to a given economy and to focus development activities on those constraints. So we look at business market intelligence that addresses productive areas in which countries have the best chances of exploiting their comparative advantage. To give an example from Georgia, Georgia probably has as many agricultural in many different areas and types of agricultural development potential as the United States because of its very varied microclimates and natural conditions. USAID finance competitiveness assessments and value chain assessments provide basic market information to identify in which areas it may be most competitive. As a result of these assessments, over 60 small Georgian farmers are exporting the first container of mandarin oranges to the EU. If we can help them to break into the EU market by meeting food safety standards and finding buyers, it will lead to a sustainable trade breakthrough to a much more lucrative market than would be otherwise available and increase incomes of Georgian farmers. Second area is business enabling environment projects to address external factors that constrain the economy. In Montenegro, the United States Agency for International Development supported the creation of the Montenegro Business Alliance. This has provided the business community with a strong voice to interact at every level of government. The member firms represent 30% of the annual GDP of Montenegro, and the alliance has deliberated on 8 key laws, including laws on accounting and on privatization. Value chain projects focus more on internal factors and the external factors that are unique to specific industries. In Georgia, for instance, we focused on hazelnuts, which are produced primarily by smallholder farmers and then processed by small and medium-sized firms. The international market can buy as many hazelnuts as Georgia can produce. We have even partnered with the company Ferrero to form an alliance with the global confectionery company and leverage resources to increase competitiveness of the hazelnut sector. This example shows that when value chains begin to take shape and we see cooperation among firms of various sizes, we benefit from, SMEs benefit from finance, technical assistance, and training. Trade and investment projects tend to address external factors that are specific to international trade and foreign direct investment promotion. Again, using the hazelnut example, we're helping the companies to better meet quality and quantity requirements of the global market, representing an annual export of around $130 million in hazelnuts last year. Improving farming practices, in pruning, pest prevention, soil tilling, and post-harvest management can result in a 30% increase in production here in Georgia. As mentioned, workforce development projects strive to increase overall labor productivity either throughout the economy or more targeted on specific industries. Once a country has identified the areas in which it has a comparative advantage, it can train its human resource base to meet the skills required by the global marketplace. So what does this mean for parliamentarians and other policymakers? We can sum up the implementation for policymakers in 3 sets of actions. The first effort for policymakers is to get government out of the way of the private sector, as other speakers have mentioned. The second important effort is to build the institutional capacity for effective, equitable, and predictable regulation of the private sector. The third action is to promote high-quality dialogue on policy issues affecting economic growth. These efforts are not easy, but they are possible and they are necessary. The first effort consists of a negative list of things governments should not be doing, generally speaking. Policymakers need to get government out of competition with private enterprise, eliminate bureaucratic red tape, and eliminate the gatekeeper positions that lead to corruption, as well as other measures. Second effort may be more difficult. It consists of an affirmative list, things that should be doing to create the proper rules of the game, the rule of law, building an effective judiciary to resolve disputes, as we've mentioned, build human capital, and managing infrastructure, providing infrastructure, managing natural resources to help create the enabling environment for business. The third set of actions is to engage deliberative, consultative mechanisms that promote a dialogue between the public and private sectors. All governments face the challenge of how to implement good policies and to stop bad ones. When vigorous debate is absent, it increases political vulnerabilities to policy mistakes. Successful countries create an environment where all ideas, good and bad, are exposed to review and rigorous debate. This debate, to be most effective, should not be limited to government, but should also include think tanks, academia, press, independent review commissions, of course, parliaments, and others. In conclusion, economic growth and stability go hand in hand. Take advantage of periods of relative stability to promote economic growth. Firm size is not as important to economic growth as entrepreneurial activity. The ability of the economy to create more enterprises and more successful enterprises is what's important. In comparison to the size and demands of the global marketplace, almost all firms in our countries are small. Firms need to work together effectively, inefficiently, in value chains to increase market share in their commodity areas. In identifying and removing the constraints in value chains, policymakers should engage in 3 sets of actions. First, stay out of the way of the private sector so that it can detect and respond to market signals. Second, build and maintain a policy and supportive infrastructure environment that regulates the private sector and effectively addresses constraints which the private sector itself is, as individual actors, are unable to address themselves. And third, promote vigorous public-private policy dialogue to minimize policy mistakes through a broad-based consensus on major policy issues. I want to thank you very much for your kind attention.
Благодарю вас, господин Хейкин, за очень удачное и успешное выступление. Спасибо. Уважаемые коллеги, выступили 3 докладчика. Записались для выступления и обсуждения 2 члена парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ. Напоминаю, что если кто-то не успел или хочет задать вопросы, вы можете поднять карточку, но в этом случае назовите тогда свое имя. Я хочу предоставить слово для выступления в порядке обсуждения господину Эрику Раулю из Франции. Пожалуйста. Он временно отсутствует. Тогда мы попросим выступить господина Массимо Пассетти из Канады.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on the small and medium-sized businesses. In particular, as a businessman, and accountant by background, I want to applaud the organizers for including this topic in the conference and for sustaining the OSCE's attention on the critical role that small and medium-sized business enterprises play in the development and prosperity of our economies, our societies, and ultimately regional stability. Let me begin by saying that with small and medium-sized businesses comprising 70% of Canada's private sector, from a Canadian perspective, there is no political discrepancy between the different political parties about the need to support these type of businesses. While we may dispute the details and the amounts of help required, we agree that these businesses require government-based support throughout the banking system, preferential tax treatment, and other helpful initiatives. For instance, Canadian small, medium-sized businesses can access government-guaranteed loans up to $250,000 Canadian dollars, based on the lending bank's loan requirements. Through the taxation system, these businesses can also receive partial reimbursement of money spent on and invested in research and development. I also want to note that SMEs in Canada share many of the challenges faced by SMEs in other countries in the OSCE region. To recall our earlier discussion at this conference, these challenges include finding and maintaining qualified labor, particularly finding employees who specialize in more than one task and having the ability to pay market rates for these specialized employees. Moreover, among the biggest barriers to developing and creating more SMEs in the OSCE region is limited access to credit and financing. I believe as parliamentarians we can help SMEs overcome these challenges and ensure that they continue to contribute to our national prosperity. For instance, financial institutions should be encouraged to use microcredit arrangements where suitable, and under other situations, encourage our financial institutions to set aside pools of money for lending exclusively to SMEs, provided, of course, that the associated regulatory paperwork should not be overwhelming. At the same time, as my colleague Hedy Fry highlighted in her 2011 annual report by the Special Representative on Gender Balance and Resolution, we also need to ensure that our policies on SMEs encourage the participation of our youth and women in order to increase their economic independence. The participation of all vulnerable groups in our society, such as migrants, ethnic, racial, and religious minorities, need to be encouraged, and their access to education, skills development, like we said earlier today, legal protection, support, and industry groups ensured so that the human capital of a nation's economy on which small and medium-sized businesses rely can be enhanced and its property strengthened. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Very good. Спасибо вам за выступление. И уже в зале наш коллега из Франции, Эрик Рауль. Я хочу предоставить вам ему слово. Пожалуйста.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Vous prions de me pardonner du retard dû à un problème téléphonique avec mon pays. Je tenais tout d'abord, au nom du président Nicolas Sarkozy, mais le chef de ma délégation me permettra, j'en suis persuadé, d'y associer François Hollande, qui sera président de la République demain matin, de dire aux dirigeants de Géorgie que nous leur apportons toutes nos solidarités suite à l'inondation qui est intervenue dans votre pays, dans sa capitale, et qui a fait...
Месье Рауль, я прошу извинения, сложности временные с переводом. Я хотел бы спросить перевод.
Je vous remercie de votre obligeance, Monsieur le Président, en fonction des circonstances. Mes chers collègues, les orateurs précédents ont démontré avec talent que l'énergie est une des questions politiques et économiques majeures dans l'espace OSCE. Pour ma part, je souhaiterais aborder plus spécifiquement la problématique des infrastructures. C'est le document de... Notre débat aujourd'hui en témoigne. Nous pourrons faire le constat d'une conscience partagée de l'importance des petites et moyennes entreprises et de leur contribution à la croissance économique, à la cohésion sociale, à l'emploi et au développement local. Car au fur et à mesure que la mondialisation de l'évolution des techniques limite l'importance des économies d'échelle dans de nombreux secteurs, la contribution potentielle des petites entreprises s'en trouvera crue. Dans l'OCDE, elle représente plus de 95% des entreprises et 60 à 70% des emplois, ainsi qu'une grande partie des créations d'emplois. Parallèlement, beaucoup des difficultés traditionnelles des PME, mauvais accès aux capitaux et aux technologies, capacité managériale limitée et productivité insuffisante, deviennent plus pénalisantes dans un environnement mondialisé. La crise financière que nous traversons l'a amplement démontré, si besoin était. Quels sont les piliers de la croissance des entreprises? L'innovation, l'investissement et l'international. En France, une étude a montré que 94% des entreprises qui innovent se tournent vers l'international dans les 3 ans, y compris s'il s'agit de petites entreprises qui, tous trois, ont comme moteur commun les fonds propres des entreprises. Or, ces fonds ont été mis à mal par la crise et le dispositif BAL 3, dont l'entrée en vigueur partielle en Europe a été anticipée à la mi-2012, va restreindre la capacité de transformation par les banques. Comment alors pallier un éventuel manque de ressources à long terme? Notre organisation se préoccupe aussi de sécurité. Je veux aussi évoquer ici le risque qui proviendrait d'acquisition d'entreprises en mal de capitaux qui détiendraient un patrimoine technologique intéressant la sécurité et la compétitivité de nos pays. Je crois qu'il nous faut être pragmatiques et ne pas compter uniquement sur le libre jeu de la concurrence et du marché dans un domaine aussi essentiel pour nos entreprises et donc pour nos sociétés. La France, sous l'impulsion déterminée de son président d'hier, et je suis persuadé de son président de demain, Nicolas Sarkozy et François Hollande, l'ont bien compris. Elle a ainsi mis en place un double dispositif de soutien aux PME. Première action, renforcer les moyens du guichet unique généraliste qui assure aux PME un triple soutien à l'innovation, 4000 projets par an, garantie des prêts bancaires et cofinancement aux côtés des banques. Très réactif, cet organisme, OSEO, a joué un rôle essentiel lorsque la crise financière a éclaté en garantissant la trésorerie des entreprises, parfois presque en totalité. Au total, 21 000 entreprises ont ainsi bénéficié. Une enquête menée auprès de 5 000 d'entre elles a montré que 50% ont évité le dépôt de bilan grâce à cette intervention et 30% ont pu ne pas détériorer la situation de leurs salariés, en évitant le recours à des licenciements et en ne baissant pas le niveau des recrutements. Ce bilan considérable dans l'économie réelle a été rendu possible par les moyens considérables qui ont été octroyés par le gouvernement sortant de François Fillon dès 2008-2009. Deuxième type d'action, la mise en œuvre de dispositifs ciblés sur les entreprises identifiées comme stratégiques. Quelles sont ces entreprises? Des PME innovantes sur le plan technologique et à fort potentiel d'expansion internationale, des PME présentes sur des secteurs stratégiques et ou en mutation et susceptibles d'émerger comme acteurs de référence. Des PME, enfin, intervenant dans les secteurs identifiés comme stratégiques par l'État. Les pôles de compétitivité, vers lesquels ont été fléchés une partie des crédits que l'emprunt national lancé en France en 2009, sont un exemple parmi d'autres de ces dispositifs. Le dispositif d'investissement dans les PME, destiné aux contribuables assujettis à l'impôt sur la fortune, en est un autre, particulièrement efficace. La somme moyenne investie s'est élevée à 28 000 € en 2009 et s'avère gratuit pour l'État. Je vous prie de m'excuser du mauvais départ de mon intervention, Monsieur le Président, et de la situation politique un peu complexe que nous connaissons actuellement. Je vous remercie.
Благодарю вас, господин Рауль, за очень интересное выступление. Я хочу далее предоставить слово госпоже Кэтлин Ферье из Нидерландов. Пожалуйста, вам слово. Кэтлин, вам слово.
Ik zit helemaal niet op te drukken. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for the very interesting speeches we have heard this morning. These speeches give us a lot for debate for the coming time, but I will limit myself for now to a question to Mr. Haken for US8 and also a little bit to the Minister for Economic Affairs and Sustainable Development. In my country, the Netherlands, there is a growing awareness that for effective development cooperation, we should be involved in entrepreneurship, in commerce. And that is a growing awareness not only in my country, but actually in all OECD countries, the donor community. So what we see is that the Netherlands is leaving the sectors education and health. And actually, more donor countries are doing this. They are changing their focus from help to investment. Development cooperation is not something that is help, but it is more investing also in our own benefit. The time for aid, you might say, is over, just like you were pointing out right now. But, and that is my question to you, and also the minister pointed out that without education, and I add to that, without a good health situation, it is very difficult to work on business, to work on commerce, to work on entrepreneurship. So my question to you is, what is the vision of US aid in this respect? I understood that you are focusing on entrepreneurship, but does this mean that you leave aside the sectors, education and health, for instance? And I'm also interested in seeing how the minister sees what could be an effective input from OECD and other countries. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, Катлин, за ваш интерес к обсуждаемой теме, за вопросы, которые вы задали. Будут ли желающие еще выступить или с вопросами, или с комментариями среди участников? Таковых нет. Поступили вопросы. Извиняюсь, представитель Казахстана, пожалуйста, вам слово.
Спасибо за предоставленную возможность. Моя фамилия Ахметов. Вообще, очень важная тема, которая рассматривается на сегодняшней конференции, потому как мы знаем, именно страны, в которых хорошо развит малый и средний бизнес, являются устойчивыми как в политическом отношении, так и в экономическом, хорошо противостоят кризисным явлениям. В этом ключе у меня, как представитель Казахстана, мне интересен тоже и опыт Грузии в части внедрения электронных форматов коммуникации. И интересует степень охвата населения как в техническом, так и мы понимаем, что невозможно сейчас довести до каждого селения таковую возможность. Как этот вопрос решается? Имея в виду средства для решения вопросов регистрации, открытия бизнеса через электронные средства, которые мы вчера имели возможность наблюдать в Министерстве юстиции. Понятно, да? И второй вопрос у меня связан с тем, что чтобы открыть бизнес, необходим, как правило, стартовый капитал. Как этот вопрос решается в Грузии? Какие возможности государство представляет для получения микрокредитов, кредитов на начальном этапе? Спасибо большое.
Благодарю вас за ваш вопрос. Хочу предоставить слово господину Карузу из Нидерландов. Пожалуйста.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Let me first of all thank our excellent panelists for their input. I have one statement and a question. My statement is that I think it is good, and it is also put forward here this morning, that it is an ideological point, that it's not only a government task to strengthen economics and microcredit and small businesses, but it is also people-to-people issue where people can give their own power how to strengthen economics. I think that's quite clear to underline. My question is to the Minister and to Mr. David Lee. I think you are right when Mr. Lee is speaking about confidence, about speaking of when you come to Georgia, I hope you leave Georgia with another picture. That's certainly true. But there is also something which is, I think, missing, and the Minister underlined two important things which is necessary for stable economic growth: infrastructure and education. But what is missing, I think, is the, let's say, the confidence special in the legal structure, the legal system of a country. And that by that I mean the protection of property. Because when a company wants to invest in a country and it has some hesitations and it doesn't know the country very well, and this legal framework is not well, and the company doesn't know of his property is protected well in that country when problems created, that could create, I think, more question marks, and that could lead to not investing in that country. Please could you elaborate on that point? Thank you.
Спасибо. Корку, спасибо за выступление. Уважаемые коллеги, кто еще хочет? Наш друг Георг Церетели сказал, что вы можете не беспокоиться. У всех продолжено время пребывания в отеле. Не обязательно спешить к 12 часов выписаться. Мы будем работать. Для нас созданы благоприятные условия для работы. Итак, уважаемые коллеги, поступили вопросы ко всем докладчикам. Я предлагаю сейчас в порядке выступления ответить на эти вопросы. И первый попрошу ответить госпожу министр. Пожалуйста.
Thank you for the questions and for active participation. I would like to also thank speakers from Canada and France for sharing their presentations as well. In terms of entrepreneurship, of course, this is a very important part of our economy. We want it to be even bigger. We have to realize at the same time that we're a country that, just 20 years ago, just a bit more than 20 years ago, we're part of Soviet Union, and there was no understanding of entrepreneurship just a few decades ago. So we're building here from scratch, and education of how to be an entrepreneur and how to start a small and medium business is coming from scratch as well. Of course, new generations are completely different in the country, and they are striving to be entrepreneurs, and many of our students go to study abroad. We have many programs in universities and postgraduates where we participate in helping our students to go study in Europe or further, and to receive experience and see how, in countries such as European countries, small and medium business is the driver for the economy of these countries. So this is one factor. It's hard to change the mentality of people when you were working for the state for years and all of a sudden you are asked to be an entrepreneur. So again, even in this field, it comes from education, and it comes from providing opportunities for young people to become entrepreneurs. And I think the biggest thing is having an open economy and having competition. And open competition. And in any size of business or field of business, when you have strong open competition, it allows for new businesses to start, and it allows for small businesses to grow. So also by providing trade opportunities with our neighboring countries or further countries also provides entrepreneurial opportunities for young people. So I think when you look at numbers, entrepreneurship is growing in the country, but of course it's a process in the making, so to say. In terms of where does the startup capital come from, it's it's similar to many other countries. Our model is no different. There is credit institutions where many credits can be received from. We just recently opened actually a credit institution in Kutaisi, which is the second largest city in Georgia, which is a U.S. investment and provides micro businesses with credits. There are of course other types of banking institutions that provide startup loans as well. So many different ways of opportunities for small businesses to start their operations. There is, of course, international organizations that assist small businesses also, including USAID and many others, GIZ and many others that assist small businesses in different sectors, including textile, including agriculture and others, to start up and to grow their businesses. We are currently trying to develop again the textile industry in Georgia. Years ago, this was quite a large production in Georgia. Today, when we look at cost of textile production in our country, it's much lower than in any of our neighboring countries due to the cost of electricity, gas, and labor costs still today. So there are many, for example, Turkish textile producers that are interested of starting their operations in Georgia. And what we're doing on our part, as on the government side, we are trying to encourage them to move here, and we are assisting them with training of skilled professionals in the first months of their operations, because the most difficult part for them, of course, is having educated, skilled workforce. And we're providing other incentives as well to make sure that these types of sectors and fields of economy are developed in Georgia in order to stimulate job creation and in order to stimulate new ways of small and medium business in the country. I enjoyed that presentation by the Canadian speaker as well, because many of the things that we're doing, I mean, small and medium business in Canada is truly the backbone of the country. I lived in Canada for 15 years, ran a business in Canada, so I know exactly how Canada supports small and medium business, and I think it's an example for many countries, so thank you for the presentation. And in terms of the legal structure, we are reforming on a daily basis, and what I want to underline is that when we speak about the reforms of fighting with corruption or any other reform, it doesn't mean that what we've done is great, let's pat ourselves on the back and we're going to stop there. No, in order for reforms to be successful, you have to be continuously developing and continuously building on the reforms and continuing with the reform process. So that includes the legal structure as well. I think we've done a lot in terms of the legal side of running business and doing business in Georgia. But if there are any specific underline, so to say, that you would like to highlight of how the legal structure could be better in Georgia, I would love to hear your opinion and your suggestions. So please feel free to give us those, because this is what we do. We love to hear your opinions and implement them in our future discussions, and then discussions lead to actual work. Thank you.
Спасибо вам за выступление. Приглашаю ответить на вопросы господина Дэвида Ли. Пожалуйста.
Thank you. I'll take the questions out of order if I can. The representative from Kazakhstan quite rightly said that access to the internet in the region is important. I would argue, as a telecommunication person, that it's probably as important as having a road to your village or even power to your village, because if you're not on the internet, you can't get information, you can't communicate in a modern way. Georgia is simply outstanding in this area. The President mentioned on Friday that 2,300 schools, and just the economy of that, obviously the majority of those are in small villages, are all connected now to the internet, and that backs up the other government policy of having English school teachers and computers in place. The reason that Georgia has been able to do this is in part because, unlike many other countries, we use a variety of technologies for mobile communications. I won't bore you with the technology, but put simply, we don't just use high-frequency transmissions, we also use low-frequency 450 megahertz, and this has allowed us to not only put internet into any village, but also allowed you to get fixed-line telephony. So you can get internet. The only question is that in some of the villages, the internet speed is slow. But that reflects the situation almost everywhere. Georgia's quite lucky in the sense that it doesn't have huge empty land areas which are impossible to service. So the internet situation is good. The second question that I picked up on, which I think was directed to me, was about confidence from the Netherlands. The minister, I think, is correct. I believe that every business decision, every investor ultimately comes down to that final moment when he says, I've got confidence that this business plan and this business will work, or I don't. And if he doesn't have confidence, he won't invest. Georgia has lots of areas where you can make a good business plan. So the question is, why do small businessmen not invest? As I said in my speech, a lot of it's history, because a lot of people grew up at a time when corruption was rife, or indeed it was a communist state, and property rights didn't essentially exist. What is happening in Georgia is that there is a program of continual improvement. One of the things that the US Embassy and the European embassies did very well following the 2008 invasion by Russia is that the aid package they put together included a lot of soft elements. And they'd recognized even back then that it wasn't just about giving money to the budget or giving money to the IDPs. It was about focusing on civil society and focusing in particular on government areas that affect confidence, i.e. the legal process. The GILET process funded by US aid, plus many, many others, are having a real effect now. As judges get better educated, the process gets more refined. But in my own opinion, the most important issue here is transparency. People need to be able to see what is happening. And as I mentioned to the minister just recently, the problem is with areas of confidence is that if you do something 1,000 times correctly, but you make a mistake once as a government in this area, everyone talks about the mistake. Yeah? It's not the 25,000 airplanes that fly every day that make the news, it's the one that has the accident. And I think this process is getting better and better all the time. But that is one area where I think the government, the aid agencies, the NGOs, and people with interest in Georgia's progress need to assist so that we can get through this historical burden into a much more modern area where people understand it. You've probably been told this, but one of the reasons the reform of the police was so successful is that, in my opinion, is that if you look at police stations, they're made with glass walls. I mean, it sounds a bit silly, but they really are. And I think that same sort of issue, they fix corruption, police have a very favorable rating, and as we move now into this legal property rights, we need to just use the same approach. Constant improvement, greater transparency, and I'm sure this is not going to be a problem. Thank you.
I just want to add very quickly that I absolutely agree that transparency is key to everything, and everything that we do on the government side should be transparent. One of the things I'd like to highlight is the process of privatization that has happened in the past years, and especially the past few months. Is what we've done is we made sure that everything is done electronically and all the information is provided electronically as well. So today, if you are a foreign citizen or citizen of Georgia, you can enter an online site where you participate in an open, transparent auction, and after the auction, all the information on the buyer is provided. You can print out your documentation without coming to the ministry at all. Everything is done through the electronic processes, and then go in and have your registration done. So this is the key, I think, to us. It helps with efficiency, of course, and saves time for business, but it also provides confidence for them that the processes are done the right way.
Спасибо. Стивен, вам слово, пожалуйста. Вы заключающий.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to two interventions in particular. And first, I'm really delighted that our colleague from the Netherlands raised the whole question of the social sectors, because clearly health and education are important in and of themselves, and they're important contributors to economic growth. I'm happy to say that our government continues to be committed globally to providing assistance on health and education, particularly literacy, and on a variety of health issues. a big theme being maternal and child health this year. But however, I also agree that like the Netherlands and other countries, the United States is becoming resource constrained and therefore having to focus. And some of the thinking here in Georgia and in this region in general is that as countries attain higher incomes, that these are sectors that will more and more require sort of internal solutions and less support from aid agencies. So in the case of Georgia, we will be largely phasing out assistance for basic education and for health by 2016 in the USAID program. There'll be other relationships that continue. I do believe that the government here has taken some very bold steps in terms of privatizing the health sector, for instance, and in ensuring that a certain segment of and growing segment of the population receives assistance through publicly funded insurance to help supplement the costs. Two residual concerns that I have are that with the rapid privatization, there's still the need for a culture both within government and within civil society to make sure that the private providers are fulfilling their obligations to society. And then secondly, something that we all need to watch out for in this country and in neighboring countries is the still very serious problem of tuberculosis, and particularly multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. So those are things that even as the U.S. government scales down some of its support, we will be keeping an eye on, and again, worldwide. The economic growth, too, is something that we won't be providing assistance forever. We more and more are relying on using host country implementers, working with local organizations. But a couple of the areas that I didn't mention that are still important is making sure that as the small and medium enterprise sector develops and as the economies develop, that women and otherwise vulnerable minority groups are also included in that growth. So those are some observations on, I think, this very important question of balance in portfolios and in development. I'd just like to say that on the rule of law, I think that is a very useful discussion to keep front and center as we talk about economic growth in the region. Happy to say that my government, the government of Georgia, enjoy a very, very close partnership on a whole range of issues. And we're very pleased with a number of the reforms that have been taken through the years to improve the climate for business and the respect for the rule of law. We also, as good friends, from time to time, very discreetly, as I hope that others do with my country, point out where we think that there may be lapses in what's an otherwise positive trend. And we aren't shy in doing that, but we're doing that because we think we're reinforcing a system that's really moving in the right direction. So, thank you very much.
Благодарю вас, господин Хайкин. Уважаемые коллеги, наша работа завершается. Мы выслушали доклады. Они были очень убедительными. Мы согласились с основными выводами докладчиков. Нам показалось чрезвычайно интересным опыт страны, которая нас принимает, опыт Грузии. Я хочу поблагодарить всех участников за активное обсуждение. Отдельно хотел бы поблагодарить нашего президента парламентской ассамблеи ОБСЕ Петруса Евтимова за то, что он дал согласие на проведение этого форума в Грузии, в Батуми, и за то, что тема малого и среднего бизнеса была вынесена в отдельную секцию, потому что это очень важная тема, особенно для стран, которые находятся в транзиторном периоде. Остается пожелать новых успехов правительству Грузии, а также благополучия гражданам этой удивительной страны. Сессия развития малых и средних предприятий закрыта. Еще раз благодарю за активное участие, а наших переводчиков за их упорный труд. Всего доброго.